Alright, another modern mystic response video. Okay, so I'm going to do some drawing and stuff. So he's complaining about the demeanor, the quality of the conversation. And this is just such hypocrisy, right? So I mean, what's the point of arguing this? I mean, I made a ton of videos where I just do some outlining of stuff, and then you just trivialize it, call it nonsense, and fluff it off. And insult me to boot, right? In comments, you and Mariana have your little, oh, Gary's an asshole and Gary's an idiot kind of conversations all the time. The video that was engaged in this feed, this most recent feedback was, oh yeah, Gary videos are like pouring sand in my brain. Nonsense, silly. These are the words you use. Watch your own videos. You're a rude, condescending, patronizing person. Okay, you're not a nice guy. You don't have nice civil conversation. You insult people, and you think you're doing it in some kind of subtle, elitist way, maybe, and that maybe everybody's just too stupid to recognize that you've just insulted the fuck out of them. But I'm not too stupid, okay? Insult received. I read your comments on other people's on your own videos to responses to other people. You just constantly demean and minimize and shit on everything I say, and you don't make an argument. You just shit on it, okay? And you just blame it on some sort of look. You made a video saying the only reason why is because you're mad at your diner owner, right? Like another insult. Like it was a diner, you know, a $10 million restaurant is a diner. You know, so you just keep trying to dig, and then you complain about other people being snarky and rude. I mean, you get what you give. And I guess to some extent I am to blame in that I react to what people give me, and I give it right back to them. And maybe I'm supposed to be the adult and I'm not supposed to be reactive and blah 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 blah. But again, this was initiated by you. I didn't make uncivil response videos to your videos until you started doing it. Alright? I mean, you started. So don't play this I'm innocent and you're just all such brutish, ignorant, nasty cheaters of the argument. I mean, I couldn't detail my argument more simply and more explicitly, in my opinion. I stated what my premises are. You haven't refuted any of them. You just mock them. You just ignore them. You just say, the economists say otherwise, even though in previous videos you've mocked the economists. And I'm just like, well, what? So I'm going to call foul. And this is bullshit. But I don't care. I mean, to me it doesn't matter. I'm going to make my arguments one way or the other, and if they're not understood, then I'm going to make them again until they are understood. Alright, so let's draw a picture again. I'm just going to keep this really simple. But here's the Fed, okay, and the Treasury's tied to it. So let's just pretend that the Treasury and the Fed are essentially the same thing. Now let's not get too complicated. Alright. And here's the banks. Alright, so there's a bunch of banks, and let's just pretend for the sake of argument that there's just the one bank, just to make things more easy. But the idea would be there's lots of banks, they all have accounts with the reserve, so there's lots of other little reserve accounts, and they're all got their names on them, they all have different amounts in them, but the Fed exchanges the money between the banks. So when somebody loans money from Bank A, okay, that money goes out as a loan, it might be deposited in Bank B, and all of that stuff happens all the time. The money moves around between these banks, and it always comes out in the end as the math, right? Okay, so let's not get lost in that. Let's just understand the relationship between the Fed and the banks. Now, the relationship that's established between the Fed and the banks is there's this idea that when you create liabilities as a bank, when you have a deposit comes in, you got to pay it back, or when you send money out as a loan, your solvency is sort of dependent, okay, on how good your loans are and how stable your deposits are. You know, they stay in there. But the point is, you have to have what's called some sort of reserves, okay, some sort of real asset value in case there's a run on the bank. So we can all understand that. If everybody starts saying, I want my deposits, I want my deposits, I want my deposits, there has to be some insurance that the bank has some money to cover those. And so that's what's kept at the Fed. It's called reserves. And the secondary purpose as of 2008 is to use the reserves to do the transfer between banks. Like Bank A will have too little money and Bank B will have too much money, and they'll do the transfers and everybody's happy. But anyway, I just don't want to get lost in crap that doesn't matter. Alright, so the point is the Fed also takes all the money that comes into the banks, right? So when people bring their money in, the banks send the money through the back door to the Fed. All the money is cleaned. Okay, I've mentioned this before, but that's what happens. The money's cleaned. And when it's cleaned, the Fed basically can give the money back to the banks clean, or it can put the money in the reserve accounts, okay, that they have in here. So let's say the reserves have to be, we'll just use 10%. That's what it used to be. So you can sort of understand that when the Fed changes this number, when it says the minimum you have to have in here is 10% of your liabilities, it could use this number to change how much cash is in the real world, okay? Because, see, I'm already, probably should have done this ahead of time, but anyway, it doesn't matter. So anyway, the money comes in to be cleaned, and it can go back to the banks, or it can go back into the reserve account. And the reserve account is essentially just good as cash. But the point is the banks in the past never kept more money than the minimum amount. Okay, they had no incentive to keep money in the Fed when they could obviously use those resources to buy equities in the stock market and make more money, right? They're not going to, bankers aren't dumb enough to leave money in the vault. They're going to use the money, if it's their money, so to speak, if it's liberated money. So, but this new circumstance was that so the old circumstance was that the Fed would have, say, $30 billion worth of money in reserve accounts that were fulfilling this minimum requirement that the banks had to hold in here. And so if a bank was short its reserves, then the Fed wouldn't give it back its clean money, at cleaning time, and instead would put the money in the reserve account. So reserves could grow. And then there might be a point where the bank is now more solvent, and now it has too much money in its reserve account, and so the bank would just simply request the Fed give it back some of the reserve money, and it would give it back in cash. So money only leaves the Fed as cash. Cash only goes out. That's the only thing, only cash goes in and out of the Fed, in the sense that from the external world. The Fed obviously feeds it with, digits, but they're digits that are converted into cash. The only way they become meaningful digits is when they're converted into cash. So what has happened with QE, and I want to point out quantitative easing, is that this is basically just embezzlement. Okay, the racket that the government has resorted to here to inflate the stock market. So that's what this is all about, is the stock market. Okay, stock market crashed in 2008. Banks were bankrupt because they held a bunch of equities that weren't worth anything. They had to get the stock market back up, and the plan, this is one of the plans, was the Fed would put a bunch of money in the reserve accounts and have the banks, instead of cashing the money out, just make digits and buy stock. So they bought $4 trillion. Trill. I guess we can do 4 trill. They bought $4 trillion worth of stuff off the stock market, and that's sitting somewhere in limbo land here, in the bank vault or in the Fed's vault, whoever's vault it's in somebody's vault. And it was basically paid for just by reserve digits, guaranteeing the creation of banker digits. Now the banks didn't have to, it doesn't cost the bank anything at all to hit a button on their computer and make $1 billion or $1 trillion. It's only a problem if it's a liability. Clearly, when the Fed did this, it didn't count it on the bank's flow chart. Okay, so the banks aren't, it isn't technically a real loan. It isn't technically a real deposit. It's technically nothing. So it's just completely embezzled money. It's money just made up to buy equities The banks don't pay anything for it. It doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't, it's just absolutely meaningless as a sacrifice for them. So it's like somebody coming up to you and saying they're going to pay you rent even though you don't own the house. Okay, so it's like just free. And so to boot, to make this even more insidious, a nonsense, is the Fed made a deal with the banks to pay them interest on these fake digits. So this fake reserve money that the banks really don't own. They can't take it out as cash because that would end up putting $4 trillion of cash into the economy. And there's only $1 trillion in the entire world. There's only 1 trillion American dollars loose. And if the banks actually pulled this money out of the reserve accounts, there'd be 4 more trillion loose. And we all know that would make cash useless. That would start its inflationary spiral to doom. So that's not going to happen. The Fed and the banks have made an agreement that they're never going to cash this out. But the joke is that they're paying this interest. So they're paying banks interest on money it costs the banks nothing to lend. Okay, there's no risk. There's no, like, you took it out of the vault and gave it to somebody, because they don't use cash, they use digits. So there's absolutely no liability to the bank whatsoever. It paid out nothing to do this, and we're paying it. Okay, whatever it is, $80 billion a month in interest for this crap, for this nonsense, or a year. I don't know what it might be 80 billion a year. I don't, it's not a huge amount, but it's a lot. It's a lot of money that the banks are getting for free, and this is just embezzlement. Okay, so the real deal is the federal government basically owns $4 trillion worth of its own bonds and stocks, but it's mostly just crap. And yeah, now that the market's high, it looks like good crap, but when the market crashes, it's going to be really bad crap, and they're going to try to sell it, and no one's going to buy it, and they're going to lose half their money. And this is where it's going to spiral into all kinds of doom, because they got $4 trillion worth of liabilities. They're only going to get $2 trillion back on their crap. They're going to be out another $2 trillion. At the very time, tax revenues are going to be down because the market's going to be down. It's just going to be, this is just kicking the can down the road. The bankers make free profits, huge profits. This is just like I said, this is just embezzlement. There's nothing else to call this. This is embezzlement. And it's just a joke. It's all fake. There's no way to reverse it. There's no way to get out of this. Now that they're in this trap, okay, they have $4 trillion worth of assets, and the only way to get the money out of the reserve accounts is to sell those assets. When they sell those assets, the market goes down, drives revenues down, but that's the only way to escape paying this interest to the banks, which they shouldn't be paying, because the banks, it's absolutely no liability to the banks. They didn't have to sacrifice money they would have loaned somewhere. They don't have to sacrifice anything. It's getting paid rent for not even owning the house. It's just completely idiotic. And they're getting paid billions of dollars a month for just hitting buttons on their computer. It's so frickin' silly. And this is the sham. This is the sham of the most powerful nuclear power nation in the world. This is the sham that's being pulled. And yeah, like the mystic says, how come they ain't getting it? How come no one's talking about that this is what's really happening? And so they always talk about loans, right? That the banks aren't giving out enough loans. Well, the banks are loaning a lot of money. Don't be fooled. It's just down percentage points from the growth levels of the past. So they're still loaning a lot of money. But they keep talking like this reserve account money was somehow banker reserve money. That it wasn't just injected by the Fed as reserve digits for the sole purpose of buying equities. And that's its sole function. It has no other function. It's not excessive reserves. It's not. It's in a reserve account, but it's not excessive reserves. It has nothing to do with reserve minimums. It has nothing to do with the cleaning of cash. It has nothing to do with anything. It's except this idea of prop up the stock market. And that's it. There's nothing here. There's absolutely nothing here, and there's no way to get out of this mess now that we're in this mess. So it's completely a desperation move. It can't be reversed rationally. It seems obvious the people who engineered this scheme must be figuring that somehow they're going to sell. They're going to sell the market short. Okay, they're going to do the Kennedy thing in 29 or whatever, and they're going to be big winners in the crash, because that's the only thing that it's the only way this can end, is in some sort of stock market crash. I mean, it's going back to 2008 levels at best. So this is just a prescription for a disaster. And why isn't somebody saying to the Fed chairman when he's asked questions in Congress, why aren't they asking him, well, this Fed money has absolutely nothing to do with loans, correct? Banks can make all the loans they want, right? As long as they have enough in their reserve accounts, they can make loans all they want. They don't have to get the cash out of the frickin' Federal Reserve to make a loan. If their reserve requirements are met, they don't have to get anything. They don't need cash to make loans. They only need cash when they have a liquidity problem, and they certainly wouldn't keep cash in a reserve account when they could invest it. Let's say it was really easy for you to invest in the stock market. Like all you had to do was go like that and you could buy a stock. You wouldn't put any money in the bank. You wouldn't leave money on the shelf. If all you had to do was snap your fingers and there was no fees, no complications, you just owned it, and then as soon as you snap your fingers, you unown it. It was that easy. There's no way you would let cash sit on the shelf. There's no way you wouldn't even sell or rent or do something with all the crap you have, the stuff. You might mortgage it to get cash to invest it in the market because the market's going up. You know, and so that's all. That's why banks would never keep money in a... There's no advantage for them to keep their money in the Federal Reserve account. The interest rate is, like I said, on $4 trillion, it's a lot of money, but it's still a very low interest rate. It's not really keeping up with inflation, technically. But like I said, it's free money to the banks. It's not... They didn't put up money. You know what I'm saying? They didn't buy stock with real money on their books. The money's the Federal Reserve money. So it's no liability to them. So they don't have to worry about inflation. They don't have to worry about anything. Because it's not money they had. It's fake money created out of banker digits that's being insured by the Fed. Yeah, I don't know. Something else. Yeah, so anyway, the fact is, yes, cash is the only thing that goes out. Nick is wrong about banks can't loan the money in the reserve accounts. They can't loan the money that is below their minimum reserves. Anything that's called an excess reserve, that's not Fed, like I said, the funny money the Fed put in, but it's really their money that's excessive, like their liquidity has become rich, and so therefore their 10% minimum is met with a different number in the Fed, and so instead of, they only need, let's say they only need $8 billion, and they have $12 billion in the account, just because they've gotten some old loans that came through, so now they're more liquid. They have $4 billion extra dollars in the Federal Reserve account. Well, yes, they have a right to take that money, ask the Fed to give them the cash, and then they can loan the money. Or they can buy stock, or they can do anything they want to it. It's their cash. So he's wrong to say they can't loan reserves. They can loan excess reserves, but first they have to convert them into cash. They first have to withdraw the money from the Federal Reserve, but they can withdraw money to the minimum. They have to keep the minimum amount, but anything over the minimum they can take anytime they want. So they certainly could loan the money, but like I said, they could loan the money without the cash. They don't need cash to loan money. But the only trick is when they make digits and create loans, they create liabilities, and so then they're reserved to meet this 10% number. That number starts going up, so they have to put cash in the Fed to compensate for the fact that the more loans they make, if they make a lot of loans, this 10% number goes from 8 to 12 or 15 or 30. So the minimum number increases, which means they have to keep more money in the reserve account, which means they basically, when the Fed cleans the money, they give less of the money back and they keep the extra in the reserve account. So that's how the money gets into the reserve account, is through the cleaning process. Anyway, so if there's any, I should have, I was going to number it. Prove me wrong. Okay, this is how it works. This is the truth. This is accurate. Now, if you're going to tell me this is wrong, you have to show me how it's wrong. You have to show me a document or something. You have to show me how it is wrong, because it's right. Anyway, alright. So I'll watch some more of this and then I'll get back to you. I have to eat my dinner and such. Alright, I'm back. Alright, so I watched another 5 minutes or so, whatever it is for. Yeah, still complaining about the demeanor of the argument again. He's saying he's got it. Okay, he's done his 10,000 hours of research. He's got it, and he's saying I'm getting it, which is sort of irritating. Yeah, I'd say I'm getting it because the more you go through this thing, you try to figure out certain elements of it. And I'd have to say there were certain elements of it I didn't understand, which was, well, little things get hard in your brain. About the whole idea that the Fed reserves are just they only go out as cash, and how's the cash get in there? Well, anyway, this is stuff I did talk about a year ago, so I don't know. I think it's clearer. I don't know. I can't say there's some important element that I have now that I didn't have before. I certainly have the element now that I thought the interest was almost legitimate, because I was thinking the digits in the reserve account were actual liabilities on the banker's books, but they're really not. And so that part, that this is just giving bankers free money for no liability, is just bullshit. Alright, so anyway, Nick just keeps saying he's got it. Right now, look, my point in my video was kind of clear to you. Alright, you cited this guy that's pay-per-view guy, and you say that you say loans aren't the issue. Okay, I agree that loans aren't the issue. They certainly can loan the money, but they can't access this $4 trillion. Banks can't request the cash. These excess reserves cannot be requested by the banks. I'm telling you, I'm sure there's a contract between the Fed and the banks. That's probably why they're paying this obscene interest, is just to keep the banks quiet. But there's clearly an agreement that says you can't have this money. You cannot ask us for $4 trillion in cash and expect us to give it to you, because we won't, because it's paying for equities that have already been purchased. So again, you cited this guy saying that the banks could withdraw this money from the reserve accounts, get the cash, and buy equities. They can't do that because they've already spent the money. I mean, I said it like 19 times in the previous video. I really shouldn't say it 19 times in this video, but answer that point. They've already spent it. They can't spend it again. They didn't even spend it legitimately the first time. Like I said, they've made digits clearly in an embezzlement scheme. Okay, this is not legitimate banking practice. It's a fake loan. It's an invisible loan. It's a what's nudge nudge something something that Monty Python used to say. Yeah, it's a good old boy agreement loan, barely on the books, so to speak. But again, it just has to do with the Fed. The Fed is now guaranteeing liabilities. Okay, it's guaranteeing the value of this stupid crap it bought, and now it's like I said previous already, through other schemes, it's guaranteeing junk bonds, and through FDIC insurance is guaranteeing a bunch of other deposits. So the Fed is it has guaranteed a ton of assets, and it has no hope, if things go bad, of paying those bills without printing cash. No hope in hell. Printing cash will be the only way out of this sloppy mess, and we know what that's going to lead to. I would hope you would agree that you know what that leads to. Alright. So anyway, so your guy is wrong. The banks can't buy equities. The money has already been spent. The banks can't withdraw that reserve money. They can't do it by agreement with the Fed. All right, I'll play this bit because this is just stupid rhetoric.
You must realise he is learning more, so thinks one way of doing it is to cajole me into saying something to him by talking wild garbage.
Yeah, so I'm not going to get this wild garbage itemized. What is the wild garbage? I mean, you just keep doing this. You keep just vaguely saying nonsense, rubbish, wild garbage. You keep doing this. And first you expect somebody with self-respect to say, oh, fine, you may do that to me. You may do that to my reputation and my integrity. And then on top of that, you're expecting me to say, oh, what a satisfactory judgment. Thank you very much. That's so enlightening. I'm glad you think I stink. Or I smell like ... Or whatever you're doing here. But I mean, it's totally useless junk. I mean, if you're not going to tell me what the wild garbage is, what's the fucking point, buddy? Anyway, I play some more. Ah, pretty flower. Yes. Yeah, lucky. Anyway, bring them in at night. Yeah, save them. Anyway, summing up. A few hours later, I watched the End of the Mystics video. Just some more lamenting about communication failure and such. And, yeah, that most people don't have time to really do this right. This thinking about things. You've seen in a lot of conversations, they just give you the cliches, the social pop culture memes. Doesn't matter what the subject is, even quantum physics, whatever. There's technical limitations, and certainly this banking thing has limitations. I mean, my drawing was turned into a big pile of slop. There's more than one moving part. There's not some directionality to it or something. It's not like you can say what it is. Like it's a rhinoceros and, it eats grass and it's grass. Yeah, well, whatever. Beyond the idea that you can say this is some contrived system to, manipulate the working classes. And to maintain the hierarchy and all that kind of crap, because fundamentally that's all you have. It's not an economic system for the world economy. It's an economic system clearly for 2 or 3% of the population. Anyway, at least this part of the system that we're discussing. So what is my counter to this? What is it? What am I left to say? Is that certainly if we're going to critique somebody else's critique, you have to do it with some kind of explicit statement. You can't just say that junk over there. That you have to say what you're finding disagreement with. I think I did that in my video. I pointed out where I think you're wrong, or what I think you stated as being wrong, and so, I mean, the two main points, I suppose, is, well, the first point is they can't buy anything with the reserve money because it's already been spent. And the other point being is that the loaning part really doesn't have anything to do with it. But it's really kind of wrong to say is they can't lend reserves. Obviously, they don't lend them as reserves. They have to cash them out to lend them. But they certainly can do that. But the reserves in the reserve account, or the excessive reserves, again, are not traditional excessive reserves. They're manufactured reserves for a completely different purpose. They have nothing to do with the banks leaving the money in the reserve accounts. They have to do with the Fed putting the money there to buy securities. And it's just a different purpose. They shouldn't even be called reserves. They should be called something else, because it's something else. QE money. It's not reserves. So maybe we could just agree on that. The money in the $4 trillion in the reserve account, outside of the stuff there, the 30 billion, the tiny little bit, It has nothing to do with reserves. It's all QE, bubble up the stock market money. And that this bubble up thing, unlike what you said, which was basically they could do this forever, or there's no real problem, there is a real problem in that this will eventually be a liability, and it will be a liability in crisis. So it does, in my opinion, guarantee that if there is a crisis, government will have even less control over the crisis, because it has created so many mechanisms where it is now the insurer of last resort. It is insuring assets that it has no way of winning this insurance scam. It's going to lose, and it's going to lose big. I'm just saying, it just guarantees that when you hit the wall, everything's going to fall off the car. The car is going to fall to pieces. Okay. So that's enough of the video. You know, yeah, I really do seek a more civil conversation, but I'm not going to pretend I'm not being insulted when somebody's insulting me. I'm just not. Yeah, I'm just not. So, till next time. Yeah. What else is there? You gotta be in it to win it. I thought of a new phrase today. What was it? To do business, you gotta mean business. Yeah, I made that up. To do business, you gotta mean business. Yeah, that sounds like something, right? That sounds like a cliche of a meanieism. Yeah, I invented that. Anyway, till next time.